Hello, welcome to Graphic Policy Radio. This is your host, Elon 11, and this is a comics podcast and also a comics television podcast. This is a comics podcast for people who know that as a disabled lawyer who was raised in a poor household and is a fighter for the underdog, Daredevil has always been a political character. But boy, did we get even more politics in this most recent season of Daredevil Born Again. That's right. We're talking about Daredevil Born Again, technically Daredevil season 4 of the new Disney Plus show. This season sees Daredevil face off with, you know what? I'm about to give you a spoiler of something that you've clearly seen from advertisements since the show has been out for months on end. You'll see Daredevil face off with Mayor Kingpin. You know, it seems to be screaming in capital letters that this is a season about Donald Trump. But those of us in New York who follow local politics realize something showrunner Dario Scatapane probably didn't know when he began writing it, which is that this season is really about Andrew Cuomo, the disgraced former governor of New York who is currently at risk of becoming mayor of New York. Now, other folks might be talking about the politics of Kingpin as Trump metaphors, but there is real urgency to be talking about this season in terms of Cuomo. But the urgency of talking about this season in terms of Cuomo is hot upon us because New York City has a primary election ending on June 24th, and whoever wins that will probably be the next mayor of New York. And this is a series with a lot to say about the city and the state of the world. It took me a hot minute to put this episode together because I knew I needed the right guest, someone who understood New York politics and criminal justice. And that's why Janos Martin is joining me today. We know each other through being active in local New York reform political activism. He has managed the historic Close Rikers campaign. He oversaw state criminal justice programs for the ACLU before running for Manhattan district attorney on bold decarceration policies that have become the gold standard in that race. As chief advocacy officer at dream.org, he now oversees policy and political programs for advancing criminal justice and climate goals. And he lives on Staten Island with his partner, Christina. And I just was like, Janos, you have to come on my podcast to talk about Daredevil season 4. So welcome to the show.
Thank you. Really excited to be here.
Yeah. For our listeners, had you watched any of the earlier seasons?
I had not, I've watched, my partner, Christina, is more into the full breadth of the universe than I am. So she's been wanting me to watch this for a while. And when I heard that there were Kingpin Cuomo parallels, that really piqued my interest. So I dove right in.
Well, I'll tell you, one of my other New York political friends who I was talking about this with, who shall remain nameless, said to me that he had to nope out of the series after episode 1 because it was too triggering. So you will be hearing spoilers of everything through episode, I believe you said you saw 3 at the end of episode 6.
That's right.
So I can definitely say I think it's a really fantastic show. If you liked the earlier seasons of Daredevil, this is at least as good as they were. And come on back, watch them, and then catch up with us here. So, well, I appreciate you being willing to jump in the middle of it. And, I think in superhero world, like there's stuff that because you've seen superhero stories before. So I
knew who Daredevil and Kingpin were for sure, even though I haven't seen all of the previous episodes.
Well, it's interesting because in earlier seasons, I really felt like Kingpin was running a Michael Bloomberg metaphor in certain ways. He was presenting himself as being a rich visionary who had a different plan for New York that was going to make things better for everyone. And, he ends up basically being exposed as a criminal. There's a lot that puts him in the public eye as literally a gangster. And superhero stories have frequently had runs where supervillains have become the mayor or the president or come to power in various ways. And it's never felt quite so believable and accurate as it did in this one. And what really impressed me with this season was in addition to just understanding like how this would work in New York is that there's so much New York City politics in this. And while there are definitely things that the show asserts that I say, like, no, guys, that's not how New York like that's not how the mayor's office works. But it doesn't matter because it is really thinking about everything from like the politics of who gets garbage contracting to obviously the police and incarceration, corruption, and everything else.
Some of the details that really impressed me about this season, we can talk, I know we're going to talk a lot about the politics, but a lot of the episodes involve the criminal justice system, which I've spent my whole career working in, and I came up working in the New York criminal justice system. And there's a lot of touches that are really on point, scenes that take place in the holding cells before arraignment, for example, where I've both been a defendant as a young man and been a lawyer. And I mean, I felt like those scenes were pretty accurately done, and there were some moments there between prospective defendants for Daredevil and or Matt Murdock, I suppose,
Mhm.
where I was like, the people who wrote this definitely have have some familiarity with what's going on here.
Yeah, that's so great. I thought that exchange he had with the man who had gotten arrested for stealing fiddle
Hmm.
faddle, that whole sequence was so powerful where you see Matt do some excellent lawyering, charming, the woman who works for the I don't even know.
Yeah, it's an assistant district attorney. She's a junior assistant district attorney to be handling such minor cases.
Okay.
She's probably a year or two out of law school.
Got it. So yeah, he totally dazzles her. And he really does bring this guy's potential time in prison down very short. And the man explains why that's actually still leaving him in an untenable position. So many shows would have just let him would have just made the man seem like he was irrational or like an angry. No, he's explaining like if I go to jail, I will miss, my ability to get my benefits and then I won't be able to get food and then I'll have to dumpster dive or may end up back here with you again in 5 days. Just addressing the system of how incarcerating people for any amount of time is inherently bad.
That gentleman had a line, "Why is the state spending 5 times more to lock me up than to feed me?" Which is a profound line that anybody who's wrestled in the guts of the criminal justice system has thought about. I mean, it's kind of why people go in the abolitionist direction, right? Because it just
Yeah.
exposes what a waste this whole system is. And so that whole scene was extremely powerful, and it felt like it must have been written by. I was actually trying to figure out who wrote it by going at the credits and looking at people's backgrounds. I'm like, that scene felt like it was written by someone who knows what's up.
Mm. Really well performed. I guess the actor's name is Charlie Hudson III. What are some of the biggest similarities that you found between Cuomo and Kingpin in terms of like their presentation in the series?
Sure. Well, the popularity of Kingpin is, I guess, extremely frustrating to a lot of people, which I think is how I think the Andrew Cuomo comeback has been taken by a lot of people, certainly in our circle, people who are progressive, people who are reformist minded, even people who, may not necessarily call themselves one of those two things, but are just disgusted by his sexual harassment scandals or his nursing
Mhm.
home scandals. And it's like, how can so many people get behind this person despite all of that? And right now, as we sit here in the end of May, Cuomo is still in first place. His lead is less than it was before, but it's still a commanding first place lead. And similarly, the show depicts that while there's a lot of people, including people in the sort of Matt Murdock universe, who are extremely disgusted by Kingpin, he also has a lot of people who either support him or sort of shrug their shoulders and say, "Why not? He can get things
Mhm.
done. He knows how the system works. Yeah, he's a bad guy, but maybe he can be a bad guy for us," which is very much how Andrew Cuomo is. There's a whole uh, constituency of people supporting Andrew Cuomo on the basis of we need our own asshole to stand up to Donald Trump. I mean, you hear that from
Mhm.
pollsters, you hear that in the streets. And you really get that vibe from Kingpin's campaign. And then he wins, and the way in which he runs City Hall. Now, I'm assuming that Andrew Cuomo never had people, murdered on command. I mean, I hope not, but there's probably areas where Kingpin is a little bit more evil in that respect. But their management styles, very much they both have a very small inner circle. Cuomo, the way he ran New York State for many years is he's got the same half dozen or so senior aides that he depends on for every important project. Some of them have been with him for many years. It's very hard to break into that circle. And it's very hard to do your job if you're not in that circle because he centralizes power. And very often on these shows, you see the depiction of how the presidency or city hall or the governor's office is run by basically, the character deferring to the same, two or three aides every time. And that's often kind of unrealistic, right? I mean, in the White House, right, there's like dozens and dozens of people who are running around doing important things, reporting to the president. But in Kingpin's case, I mean, I think both he and Cuomo have a deep sense of distrust, and they really prefer to have a very small group of people around them.
Mhm.
And I think, I mean, those are a couple similarities that jump right out.
Well, one of the guys that struck me is there's this like British attaché who is new this season. I couldn't figure out who he was. It was Buck. The character's name is Buck something. And I'm like, is this like yassified Joe Prococo? Because so Joe Prococo literally was convicted of corruption and just got out of jail despite that, and was like the right hand man of Andrew Cuomo for forever, basically. Like this guy who's like a front runner in the New York mayor's race, his main like attaché was sentenced for corruption charges. Um, and my friend used to joke, like, if the reason you couldn't get anybody, including progressive leaders, to criticize Cuomo because people were so afraid of him, and
Hmm.
afraid of angering him, and afraid of incurring his wrath. And the joke was like, if you say Andrew Cuomo's name 3 times in a darkened bathroom, Joe Prococo will show up and break your knees. So I had forgotten that he'd gotten released in 2023, but this is the sort of like weird revolving door of political corruption that you also see in the series, where like people in this show know that Kingpin was literally a mob boss, but they have this sense that, yeah, he'll be their mob boss. And the thing that I'll say to any viewer, any listeners who might be thinking that perhaps Cuomo would be an asshole for the good guys, is that Cuomo has the same funders as Donald Trump.
Hmm.
He's answering to the same money men as Donald Trump. They are backing him for the same reasons. He is regularly shown deference to Donald Trump and is deferential to him, like in their exchanges as people. And they agree with each other on a lot of policy points. So, no, he will not. Truly, if I thought that a bully could save us from Trump, I would understand. But that's just not this man. Cuomo literally kept the GOP in control of the New York State Senate for over a decade. All he cares about is his own power.
Hmm.
He shames his father's name left and right. So, like, please get over it.
There's
If folks,
actually
yeah.
there's actually a way in which, and I was saying this to Christina while we were watching
Mhm,
the early episodes of the season. There's actually one important way in which I think Kingpin is a more sympathetic character than Cuomo,
mm,
and
mhm,
that is he spends a lot of time early in the season. And this is where, you'll have to give me grace if this turns out to be a total misinterpretation based on how the last few episodes of the season go, since I'm only through episode 6. But
mhm.
he expresses a lot of remorse, and
Yeah.
he insists that he's a changed man. And he there are examples of how he behaves maybe differently than he used to. I mean, for example, there was a situation involving organized crime where he was very reluctant to jump back in and said, "We're
Mhm,
past this. We're trying to focus on fixing the city." In his personal life, he is, going to couples counseling. And in terms of leaving behind his life of crime, now, I mean, there's a lot of tension around this throughout the season, but
mhm.
it does seem like he believes, at least to himself, that he has turned over a new leaf and that he's trying to do something better and more significant with his life. I think what's jarring to me about this Cuomo run is that it would have been so easy for him, whether or not he meant it, to say, "Hey, look, I've been out of the scene for a little while. I've learned that maybe some of my actions were wrong, but I'm back and I want to get things done for New York." We don't get any of that remorse
Yeah.
or introspection from Andrew Cuomo or his team.
Mhm,
All the women who accuse him of sexual harassment, they're liars. The nursing home scandals, they're fake news. Everyone criticizing him is, left wing complainer. It's as if
mhm.
he's back in Governor's Mansion in 2021 and nothing has changed. And it's just amazing to me how little reflection he's had about how anybody could be critical of him. And that's what he and his team are bringing to this race. So in that sense, I feel like
Mhm.
Kingpin is actually a more sympathetic and sort of engaging character. You know,
Yes.
he's trying to be different.
Yes, that is true. I mean, and yeah, Kingpin definitely loves Ayala Zurer's character Vanessa, and they have like real chemistry. Cuomo's main interest is sexually harassing young women who he can wield power over, which is not a characteristic of Kingpin. So that is true. Kingpin is preferable as a human.
Yeah, you'd probably rather work for Kingpin.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, Kingpin's not going to sexually harass you. Um, Speaking of people who work for Kingpin, one of the portraits that I found so shockingly accurate was the character played by Michael Gandolfini. I I am allergic to liking the children of famous actors, but this young man is
Hmm.
giving such a pitch perfect and thankless performance as exactly the kind of campaign scum that I have encountered in my life. Like I think of them as like the guys in the navy blue suits because they were the kids who, I used to see them when I was younger, and they'd be like, they want to go into politics because they want to be an operator. They want to have power. They want to be making and breaking deals. And just seeing and interacting with them is what made me think that there was no place for someone like me
Hmm.
working in electoral politics because those guys were so disgusting. And Gandolfini is 100% like that guy in this role. He's doing such a good job.
Giving
Um,
Staten Island a good name, you
oh,
know.
yeah.
Yes, no, of course. I mean, I think he's a very accurate Staten Island character. But yeah, no, it's he's a fascinating character because it does seem like he is pretty one dimensional at first. It was very interesting that he showed a real moment of courage, when the leak happened and he had
Hmm.
and he took responsibility for it. I mean, that's the kind of thing where there are people even scummier than him in the real political world who would not
Yeah.
take responsibility for something like that. In fact, would probably try to pin it on someone else. But
But I think
yeah.
I think he's smart though. Like I think he knew that that would go down better with
Mm,
Kingpin,
yeah.
and did. And I felt like we took. I was like, that's a gamble, but I bet it's the right one, and then it was because he is a true believer, but he just
Hmm.
thinks that like doing that, throwing down and coming clean is going to prove how much of a true believer he is, which it does. And I see the contrast between him and the long-suffering aide who is like worked in the council for many, many decades, and the sort of tension between this like young white guy who sort of resembles a
Mm,
demographic of people who perhaps uh, Kingpin has motivated to go to the polls anew, and her who's been around and is just trying to like make things run like they always did, and how much cognitive dissonance is she able to function under before she has to accept that no, this is not just another you know mixed bag elected official that you're working for. This is a super villain, and they sort of,
aren't
yeah.
there parallels to the Adams administration? I mean, we're bouncing basically from one corrupt
Mm,
New York. I mean, between Trump, Cuomo, and Adams, we really have like such an array of corrupt New York politicians
yeah.
in these days. But I mean, weren't there a lot of well, I think in particular about some of the deputy mayors? I mean, there were people with legitimate pedigrees, people who had strong civil servants who chose to take senior jobs in the Eric Adams administration
Hmm.
probably out of some sense of loyalty to New York City or their colleagues in government or something. But I mean, to me, was very obvious from very far away that Eric Adams was corrupt and was going to run a corrupt administration. And in the end, all of those people jumped ship because they
Hmm.
eventually realized it was that tension you're talking about was untenable. It took some people a year, it took some people 2 or 3, but there's pretty much none of those people are still in the Adams administration. And you sort of have to ask, wasn't it obvious from the beginning that's how this all was going to turn out?
Yeah, and I hope that they've learned something from that because, like, I think I understand why people think they could make a difference in making things not be terrible, but they couldn't. Um, everything, everybody just came complicit. I want to also emphasize to listeners that like the election is not decided. Most people this is one of the reasons I really wanted to make sure we got this episode out, is most
Mm.
people have only now just started paying attention to the fact that there's a mayor's race. They've only heard Cuomo's name because, he was the governor forever. And if they're older, they also know him because of his father. And they don't have much information to go on. And what they have is a mythology. And, I think Gandolfini's character says, Daniel says in the show, he says, "You've made things happen for yourself, and now you'll make things happen for New York. Mayor Fisk, that's the coolest thing on the planet." And it just sounds like he is an aspirational figure for people who want to be able to get away with things themselves,
Hmm.
and also have written a class narrative on him that isn't actually true. In the case of Kingpin, the class narrative is true. He grew up, not poor, but working class. Um, but like, people want to, and we know this is part of the appeal of Trump, is like somehow people have under the impression that he's this like self-made rich guy, and therefore they can be like him, and they want a piece of that, and that's part of the aspirational desire of voting for him.
I was trying to think about one other sort of political strength that Kingpin has, that Cuomo has, and that Trump has. I was reading Maggie Haberman's book about Trump and how the first time pollsters started working, I think pollsters that were involved with Trump started working with him. They were absolutely floored that his name recognition was as close to 100% during his first presidential run as anybody they'd ever even polled on, including like active presidents and such. And when I think about this moment we're in, especially the whole 2020s, basically, where it seems like the monoculture era is kind of behind us, and people's access to information sources are ever more fragmented. I think there's a real potency in being a recognizable figure, especially for lower information voters. And
Mm.
I mean, that's kind of like, Kingpin. Yeah, he's a badass. I've heard of him.
Mm-hmm.
He got things done, right? So there's something that is for people who, are not reading about his housing policy, right? Like there's
Yeah.
something attractive about him. And I think Cuomo
Mm-hmm.
benefits from that too. I think
Mm-hmm.
it's, some of it is literally the Mario Cuomo stuff. I mean, I think,
Yeah.
uh, I think for political families, that is part of their potency. I remember when I was campaigning against Cy Vance for Manhattan DA, I actually had difficulty with the voter at the door, an older guy who really liked Cy Vance's father. And like, they had been confused about whether I was running against Cy Vance or Cy Vance's father, which is crazy
Yep.
because he hadn't been in, politics since the 80s.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. His father would have been like 90,
yeah.
right? So.
Um, and so I'm sure there are people who like Andrew Cuomo because of Mayor Cuomo, but then I'm sure there's also people who are just like, yeah, that guy, he was like been doing stuff, right, for a while. Like I've heard that
Mm-hmm.
name, I can
Yep.
picture him. And that is worth something in politics.
And what I want listeners to take from this is that that's a thing that you can do. You can talk to your neighbors so that they've heard something else. You can actually have conversations with people and tell them about the many excellent candidates that we have running for mayor of New York City.
Hmm.
And like, we have many good people who are like, there's like two who I'm ecstatic about, and others who are like a-okay. And you can rank 5 of them because we have ranked choice voting in New York, which is a whole other thing where it's sort of like, okay, so ranked choice is like, if I'm asking my husband to get me ice cream and I don't know what the flavors the store has for that day, but I'll say to him, look, get me a pistachio. If they don't have pistachio, I want lime. If they don't have lime, then I want coconut. And if they don't have any of those, I'm sure they have chocolate, so that'll just be my backup.
Hmm.
Well, I just gave you my ranked choice ballot. Okay. Like, you say what you want the most. And if they don't have it, then they'll give you the second most. And if they don't have it, the third. But at no point in time do you rank a flavor that you do not want. Right.
Exactly.
I don't want vanilla. I don't want Andrew Cuomo. So I'm not going to vanilla's not on my flavor list, and Andrew Cuomo is not on my candidate list. So do not rank anybody. One of the reasons that Adams won the mayor's race is that people who didn't even really like him were like, well, I guess I'm supposed to rank 5 people and like put him in at the bottom. Like, you don't have to do that. Don't rank anybody who you don't want to be mayor. Just, but we have 1 million people. Like, you could totally fill your ballot. A-okay. But anyway, I want people to feel empowered to have these conversations with their friends and neighbors, to help them understand that we have other options, remind them about the truth of what Cuomo has done to us, how he's hurt the city. And like, we got talking points we can send. I have talking points I can send to you to help you prepare for this. But like that last mile conversation is most effective between you and the people you know. And if you're listening to this and you're like, I don't live in New York, you want to shut the fuck up. Like statistically speaking, you probably have some friends who do. So like get on, come on and join us. And like let's make sure people actually know what's happening and what are the stakes. Because I also think that part of why we see Fisk come to power in Daredevil is this is similar to Trump, people being like, what the fuck? We might as well try it. Everything's gone to hell. I don't know, which is not something that you need to say in the case of the New York 2025 election, because there's plenty of good people you can actually vote for.
Well, if I, I know we're talking about Daredevil. If I can digress just into for a minute into the 25 cycle, I spent the afternoon yesterday on Staten Island hosting Zoran Mamdani. I don't know if he's one of the people you're excited about or one of your
He
AOK
is.
people.
He is.
And, we had a great, we visited businesses, pastors, talked to voters at bus stops. But what was fascinating to me is, I'm escorting him to the Staten Island ferry, which is just a 2-minute walk from the bus depot. And there's a young guy on his headphones, and he looks up and he sees Zoran about 15 feet away. And he goes, holy shit. And he takes off his headphones and runs up and he's like, are you Zoran Mamdani? It was the most excited I've seen somebody about a local politician. And I'm not counting AOC as local because she's like,
Yeah.
but
She's
nationally.
national.
But I would say
Yeah.
like of somebody running for a local seat, it was like the most enthusiasm I think I've seen in a long time. And so as he's explaining how excited he is to see Zoran, this woman is observing the interaction. She's like, is that Zoran Mamdani? And I'm like, yep. She's like, oh my God, my boyfriend's going to be so jealous that I'm here. And she runs up, can I take a selfie with you? And I was like, wow, this is like genuine enthusiasm on the ramp to the Staten Island ferry,
Yeah.
And I think that when you talk about that energy where people are like so frustrated and they're like, might as well go with something different. You can go in a kind of reactionary direction, like a Cuomo or a Kingpin, but I think Zoran's inspiring a kind of an energy that goes in the opposite direction, right? Like
Yeah.
something where,
Yeah.
these are big, bold ideas. He's young. There's he's newer to the scene. But that also presents like a different direction we can go if what's going on now isn't working. And I think there's a real genuine, like I'd been following the campaign and supportive of it, but like the way that those two people just back to back, like responded with like pure emotion was something that made me think like, wow, his campaign is really putting something special together here.
Yeah, absolutely. And, and also of real substance. I mean, so
Mm-hmm.
listeners, like Cuomo literally had a chat GPT housing policy that didn't make any sense and was literally put together by chat GPT. Like no human being worked on this. We have actual housing policies from other candidates, incredibly detailed, sound things that make sense. You can read them and make decisions about whose makes the most sense to you. But like, I think also about the role of Bibi Urich in this season. And she's the young woman who has a person on the street streaming show where she interviews New Yorkers. And I thought bringing that into this season was a really smart narrative choice to sort of be able to expose the environment of the city as people are feeling it, because viewers haven't been in Matt Murdock's New York for some years. We don't really know what it's like, what's been happening. We've been away, like as the show's been away. So it's a cool tool to bring us up to speed, and then we really see how they play, how social media as a tool that like any people are able to use to speak directly to voters and directly to the audience. She's using it in a way that kind of cuts both ways. Like she's putting people's voices who would not be featured in the news, who would not have access to other platforms, forward and face front. But she doesn't ask the follow-up question of like, well, is there more crime?
I'm really glad that we're going to jump into this part of it because that's definitely the role of crime and fear and the politics of it is definitely a parallel between the show and contemporary New York. I was really actually watching for like how bad is crime in Murdoch's New York City, because it's very hard to tell sometimes in real life and certainly on shows, whether people's fear, like what it's coming from and how related it is to actual crime numbers. I mean, as somebody who works on criminal justice reform, one of the things that the statistics I learned while I was running the Close Rikers campaign that was most staggering is that there was a period from the late 1990s to the late 2010s where crime in New York City went down for 20 years in a row. And yet, when New Yorkers were surveyed about it, they thought it went up every single year.
Mm-hmm.
So, you have some, I think, probably millennial Gen X people who, when people talk about like crime being out of control in New York now, are like, actually, like those of us who grew up here in the 80s and 90s remember when it was like it felt legitimately unsafe to walk down certain blocks that now have like fancy coffee shops and no crime at all. And then, of course, like there's probably even older heads who are like, well, you grew up in the 80s and 90s. I remember the late 70s.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I don't know in the BB sort of man on the street interviews, there's definitely a perception that crime is so bad that you can't even take your family to a dinner, as one character says. What's fascinating is that like I hear that all the time. I've
Yeah.
sometimes am out in other cities for work, and it's like, oh, you live in New York? Like, I wish it's gotten so crazy there. Like, I wouldn't even feel safe bringing my family there. I'm like, what are you talking about? That is
Yeah.
so not consistent with like just go outside on a nice day in the spring, and
Mm-hmm.
it's totally at odds with that perception. But I think the show does a really good job saying, I mean, sometimes perception shapes political reality.
But I actually can't tell from the show is that like the show doesn't. There's a few things the show is really ambiguous about, and one of the things is I don't think we can tell if people are repeating propaganda about crime or if they really are experiencing crime, because there is a serial killer, but
Who's
that's
killed 60
certainly,
people? 60
yeah,
people's a
which is like
lot.
a lot of fucking people. And he's been operating for a long time. But that's also, are they just reflecting on that? Whenever people have New Yorkers doing a riot because of a blackout, I get offended because actually, no, we had a blackout and nobody fucking rioted, actually.
2004 or 5? Yeah.
2004, I want to say, whatever. Yeah, 2004. Yeah. Nobody rioted. It was all like that. It does not required to riot because the lights go out. I think it's a real question. Like when people are talking about crime, are they thinking about the serial killer situation or are they repeating a meme? And we know that part of the reason that people think that there's more crime than there is because of media coverage, like traditional old school media, mainstream media, corporate media coverage of like local news, where if it bleeds, it leads. So that gets covered a million times more readily than the important work of like that the nonprofit organizations in our city are doing to improve the city and things like that. Um,
Hmm.
and it's a great visual tool in here as well, just to be able to sort of shift the look and feel of what we're seeing on screen to look at through her lens, through the camera. And she's the niece of a renowned journalist who appeared in the first season of the series. So I think it's kind of cool to compare, like, he was this respected muckraking journalist, who was murdered by Kingpin in his quest to uncover corruption. And now his niece is like part of this younger generation, and there isn't a journalism job for her to fill. So of course she has to become like, an influencer doing her own thing. I think
Yeah,
it's nuanced in a way.
that is a great contrast, especially RIP to Tom Robbins, who was a
Mm-hmm.
friend, and really there was something about he passed. For those who don't know him, he was a Village Voice reporter for many years and a great investigative journalist in New York City, especially for, I would say, the 90s and first 15 to 20 years of this century, and really of a bygone era where New York used to have a lot of really impressive investigative journalists who would spend months on stories. They'd have a team of interns pulling documents at different offices, and then this a bombshell story would come out that would just shake things up, and that takes so much work. And it's really the exact kind of story that the media landscape doesn't monetize appropriately at all these days.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, I think having that juxtaposition is yeah, it's telling, because here in real New York City, we're pretty much out of investigative journalists at this point.
But definitely encouraging folks to support Hellgate, which has excellent
Yes.
coverage of the local races. So go support Hellgate.
Hmm.
I want to get your thoughts about the Hector Ayala storyline. He's played by Camara de los Reyes, who died right after they finished filming the series. And he plays the White Tiger, who's like a very man of the people superhero, and gets arrested for trying to save the life of a man who the police was actually an informant who the police were shaking down and bullying. What would you have, like, from your perspective working in the court system, like what did you think? What did you think of that?
A fascinating storyline. There's a lot of ways to get courtroom drama wrong. And I mean, not even
Mhm.
wrong because people don't understand what they're doing, but more just because in a pursuit of creative license and doing the right thing for the drama of the show, you kind of get off the rails of how the legal system works. And I thought the White Tiger Ayala trial was in a lot of ways pretty realistic. I think, for example, the initial bail hearing in which the judge wouldn't even consider the possibility of granting bail was accurate. There's no way that a person who is accused of murdering a police officer would have even been allowed to make an argument for why they shouldn't be remanded to jail. Um, you had the presence of all the police officers in the courtroom, which you often see when there's a situation involving a police officer. I think the theatrics of the trial, of course, were a little, I mean, it's television. This is something TV always gets wrong, perhaps intentionally, but like the DA doesn't do cases,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Like you didn't see like Alvin Bragg like prosecuting the Donald Trump case. Like that's just not how it works. And there's no way that the sitting district attorney would be. In fact, I think the realistic thing is that the sitting district attorney would probably be sitting in the first row right behind his team, and I could easily imagine a situation with
Mm,
with in judges' chambers, that in those intense back and forth. I could see that, but no, the DA is not going to be like giving a closing statement. He's got he's got a 1,000-person organization to run. But I think a couple things stood out to me. I mean, I do think it was the right verdict in the kind of like realistic sense. I think I think with all the information that we were presented to as viewers, a jury would have found that there wasn't, you couldn't have beyond reasonable doubt that Ayala, committed murder. That was interesting. I thought manslaughter might have been closer. I mean, this is me just
yeah.
nerding out from a criminal
Sure,
justice
sure.
standpoint. I mean, Ayala's defense is like he slipped and fell into an oncoming train. If I were a juror, I'd want to wrestle with that one a little bit. And of course, manslaughter does not carry the same prison sentence as murder in the first or second degree. So if I were being hyper realistic as a writer of the show, I could have seen that. But then, of course, you wouldn't have had the, very important plot point that followed. So for the show, I guess it made sense that he was not guilty on all counts. But
Yeah.
yeah, that's sort of my legal summary of the proceeding.
Well, when the end of the episode, when you hear the sounds of, I think he said we wanted to go to Luquilo in Puerto Rico, and you hear the sounds
Yes.
of the coqui frogs. I cried, like,
Mm,
and I think I would have cried even if I didn't know that the actor had died, because it was
mm.
like so fucking powerful. Right? Go
Yeah,
ahead.
absolutely. I mean, my partner Christina is Puerto Rican, and so we go there, and the coqui is it's a beautiful sound. It's also realistic that like white, hedge fund guys who buy a property there find it annoying when it's like actually a beautiful part. So I felt like that's what I was saying. There's so many little things that the show gets right
Yeah.
on the nose. We were also Christina and I were talking about, we don't have vigilantes here really. I mean, costumed or not, and I think there really is something that there's really something that requires courage to be a vigilante that most humans just don't have, right? I mean, just like think about what Ayala did. I mean, that part was almost like the unrealistic part, even before
Yeah.
before it's like if you walk into a subway station that's deserted and you see two guys beating up a third guy, 99.9% of people are like, I'm out of here. And then maybe that 0.1% is like, should I call 911? Should I like tell the MTA booth clerk?
Mhm.
But so I mean, yeah, who how often do you actually see that kind of courage in real life? Whether or not it's under like the formal guise of a official vigilante or just, a good Samaritan. Yeah.
Well, one of the other interesting pieces from the show is that, in real life, we have problems of there being white fascist militias who use the symbolism of the character, the Punisher, as a symbol and avatar for their hateful, like, white supremacist bullshit. The actual artists who invented the Punisher have come out and said, like, guys, you are totally misunderstanding art if you think anything we're saying is like pro, beating up and using violence for no reason. Like, he literally was designed as an antagonist. Um, and here we have Punisher back in the series and getting into conflicts with Matt. And when we saw the corrupt. I mean, in the world of Daredevil, there are good cops and bad cops. And in the
Mm-hmm.
world of Daredevil, the corrupt bad cops are like putting Punisher branding on themselves, is very much in line with what we see with the thin blue line skull stuff from Punisher. It was cool that the series was like, we are going to acknowledge that this happens. And something that one of my favorite TV critics, Sean T. Collins, pointed out is that a parallel between the character Punisher in the TV show, saying that he is not accountable for his fanboys,
Mm.
i.e., the cops who are putting his branding and beating up people,
Mm-hmm.
is like how Marvel, the Marvel Disney won't confront the fascists who are using the Punisher's logo and branding on their own off-market things and toys they're selling.
Hmm.
And I'm like, oh, that's a great comparison. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, when I think about this or the Punisher tattoo, what comes to mind immediately is the Uvalde shooting, where
Mm.
you had all these, you have these cops with that kind of insignia who, yeah, they're the tough guys, right? The people who stand up, but then of course, like there's one person gunning down kids in a school, and like that bravado immediately melts away, and that's to me the association I'll always have with people in law enforcement using Punisher logo.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's something, powerful in how many cops we see behaving badly in the series. And while we don't get a full systemic condemnation of policing, like but it's complicated because we also do see the head of the chief of police, Gallo, getting
Hmm.
valorized as this guy who opposes Kingpin, at least to an extent. Often Marvel are very much like, there's good cops and bad cops. We have to get rid of the bad cops. And there are a lot of bad cops, but rather than looking at the systemic problems of policing itself. But I like how they're kind of characterizing the bad police as like a gang with like
Hmm.
a gang insignia even.
Yeah, well, absolutely. I think this is always where, I mean, and one of my earlier in my career, I was at the CCRB, which, for people who don't know, Civilian Complaint Review Board is theoretically the civilian oversight of police misconduct in New York City. I say theoretically
Mhm.
because under the law, the police commissioner's final say on all disciplinary matters. So there's an entire book by Mac Muir that just came out. I don't have the name off the top of my head, but um, it's specifically about how the CCRB is really unable to hold police accountable in New York because of the way it's designed. But in that experience, I mean, I was policy counsel, so I would see uh, dozens and dozens of cases a week of people complaining about police misconduct. And I think the few bad apples thing, anybody who's familiar with New York policing knows that that's the wrong framework. And it's not that there are a whole host of bad people. I'm not saying, I think usually people who use the argument, few bad apples, are like, look, most cops are just guys who are doing their job. And, there's only a couple guys that are really like shady, corrupt, violent, mess with racist, mess with people on purpose. And that may be true, but what the thin blue line is all about, and what the sort of gang like aspect of it is about, is that many cops who are probably decent individual officers themselves and decent people themselves will go very far to protect those bad apples. And it's
Yeah.
very, and in that sense, it's very coordinated and very impenetrable for anybody to hold individual officers, let alone a department, let alone precinct, accountable.
And we see some of the internal tension in the series too, like even in the courtroom, like where some of the cops are like, like White Tiger actually helped me. And other cops are like, I can't believe you just said that in court. I also appreciated when the police gang, being Punisher fanboys, is revealed. It's in a moment that we can see because it's a tattoo on an officer's wrist, and Matt can't see it because he's blind. And
Mm.
if his fingers were touching that tattoo, he could probably feel it because there is sometimes a bit of a textural difference. I say while feeling my arm, but like he isn't touching it. So it's like the viewers have some knowledge about what's happening in that early episode that Matt doesn't have and can't have yet.
Hmm.
The whole like setting up the main antagonist of Fisk as being the chief of police was a little bit like not how I would have written it. I mean, and as much as you think like, well, I mean, the cops aren't going to like a criminal. It's like, yeah, but they seem to be fine with Trump, who's a criminal also, you know, like even the guys who got like attacked on January 6th, you know, they're like, yeah, okay, you know, except for the handful that decided to run for office. The others of them seem okay with supporting somebody who tried to get them killed.
Yeah, I mean, the idea is that law enforcement is necessary for some people to uphold a certain image of society that and protect people from certain people that they're scared of. And so that's why the people can sort of hold the cognitive dissonance of somebody who's actually proven himself to be a criminal, and Donald Trump to be the defender of law and order, because
Mm.
his nemesis is the same as theirs. And who he will go after is the kind of people that they would prefer to go after too. There's definitely a more eloquent line around that uh, people have pointed out before, but um, yeah, it's I think what's actually also good about the show is that it shows that even though the outcome of a police force being deployed in this way um, does obviously affect communities of color more and poor people more, the police force itself is pretty diverse. And I think that's actually accurate,
Hmm.
right? I mean, the NYPD has become more diverse than it ever has been, and yet the problems persist. And you see many policing problems in Black-led cities where you have a Black police commissioner and a majority Black police force. There's definitely just nuance into how we even wrestle with the systemic incentives of the modern American policing system, where like the outcomes are that it just leads these awful discriminatory results, but it's beyond the sort of black and white of how we may have perceived it, decades
There's a
ago.
there's a moment that happens that might be after you stop watching it, but I don't feel like it's much of a spoiler. So it's a moment where the niece of Hector Ayala is just, she's like, we can't go to the police. You know they aren't going to do anything
Hmm.
about it. She straight up tells Matt, you cannot trust them to do anything about it. And she's so angry at him and disgusted with the system. And like the young woman who plays him, I was very, I mean, good child actors are hard to find. I think
Hmm.
this girl did a fantastic job, but she just straight up says it. We can't go to the police. You know they don't care. And this is before Matt has, like, I bet Matt had an inkling that Hector was murdered by the police, but it's before he had like actual proof of it. And like the girl is like, come on, dude, you know that they fucking killed him.
The idea that is one of the things that really comes across in this show that I think is so realistic, and something that we really have to wrestle with in our politics and governance, is that even if the police aren't corrupt and aren't actively murdering the people that we care about, there's still a question of whether they can actually do anything about it, right? We have an enormous city of 8 million people. It's a big city. It's a sprawling city full of big buildings. And so the idea that just like having a couple more cops is going to prevent crime is just totally belied by real life. I mean, I think Scott Stringer had a proposal, let's put a police officer in every subway car. I mean, I can't think of anything more
God,
ridiculous than that, right? Like,
no,
first
it's
of
so
all, yeah, I mean, first of all, like, where are we going to find and pay for the thousands of extra police officers to do that? Second of all, like, that's not how that will not prevent crime from happening. There are so many
no.
things that go into the origins of why crime happens, and I think the show points out that, like, I mean, they had a bank that, having a lot of police officers didn't do much good for that particular bank robbery situation.
Yep. And I'll
Yeah,
say I live in the neighborhood that had that subway bombing, and you know who caught the subway bomber?
it's like
It
a
wasn't the
bodega guy,
police.
right?
It was a bodega security camera guy. Like
Yeah.
it was regular people because
That's exactly the scenario, Ilana, that I thought of when that happened.
mhm.
Yep. Hmm.
So like we have proof of this. We know how people get caught, and it's through like regular people observing things and not through spending all of your money on police. If you could if spending all your money on police would solve it, New York would have solved it by then because our police force is larger than most armies. Like the police force is enormous. And so if that was a solution, things would be solved. We know that we know it's not. It's not like a hippie position to say that that doesn't work, you know?
Yeah, and I think, given that Zohran Mamdani's in second place now, I think we can
Mhm.
dream a little. And I think one of the most interesting things about what his mayoralty could look like is he's really leaned into the fact that there would be a Department of Public Safety that would invest heavily in things like gun violence prevention programs and really just double down on. I heard him talk about this yesterday, not so much inventing new things, but just giving more resources and expanding programs that we know work. We have pilot programs that work in like this district in Queens, but haven't been tried anywhere else in the city. So like we have a lot of ways that don't involve increasing the size of the police or the size of our jails that can make our community safer. And it'll be a fascinating opportunity to really prove that because I think regular people, both in real life here in New York City and certainly in the reality of the show, their gut response to fear is like, well, we need the cops to be doing something or doing more, right? And that makes sense because people haven't really been presented with a fully resourced alternative approach to how you would make our community safer.
That's true. Yeah, because we can say, well, we have alternate programs. They haven't solved it either. It's like, yeah, but they spent $3 on them. Okay, so why don't
Yeah,
we?
$3 in one neighborhood, right? So
Hmm.
that's why it hasn't
Hmm.
worked everywhere.
Exactly, because we do know like violence intervention community programs that are not police based are successful. They're just like are not funded. It's not a mystery, you know? I mean, it's interesting because like in order for a superhero show to succeed, it has to have we have problems that are solvable by a superhero that are not solvable by anything else. But well, you know, in the comics, like Luke Cage becomes mayor at one point, and I'm like, you know, like if Matt really wants to you know, Matt Murdock for mayor is a storyline I'd be curious to see out. You know, um, lawyer for the indigent may have some insights to offer.
I just have to jump in because you got me thinking. I mean, how good a
Sure.
politician would you be if you could hear what everybody's saying? You know?
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, like, who
Yeah.
needs a pollster when you can just like overhear the room and be like, you know what? This is the vibe that I need to respond to. I think
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. He would be so ready. That's so true. Oh my god. Yeah, no, he's brilliant at reading people. That's like literally his superpower. He's extremely charming and he's worked with people who are struggling from all walks of life. Like I think he would be a really strong candidate. Probably have to do something about showing up bloody to things so that, you know. Oh man, how amazing is the moment where Heather, his girlfriend, asks if he's committed if his side he's like beat up. She's like, is this coming from self-harm? And I'm like, it
Yes.
is self-harm. It's just not the kind you think of, but yes. Um, yeah, well, some of the best Daredevil stories in the comics are the ones that really look at that angle of the character's emotional problems. So good for you, Heather, for identifying that the injuries that Matt has are, in their own way, a sign of self harm. One of the other things that really made the show feel vital and contemporary to me, and also connected both Daredevil and Kingpin, is how Matt's senses are constantly getting overwhelmed by everything around him with especially like once Kingpin from the Kingpin campaign and then especially once Kingpin comes into office. There's always some noise or something like he's trying to pretend that he can just go and be a normal lawyer and not be Daredevil anymore and he's going to work for a firm that are going to take profitable cases for once rather than just, you know, charity cases. He's turning over a new leaf. And the sounds around him, the sounds of injustice and the sounds of suffering prevent him from being able to ignore the reality. Parallel, Kingpin, you can see like I think it's like the very first scene when he's mayor. He's like in this fishbowl, and you can see how he's feeling. All of these eyes are on him, and he is like looking. He's like being scrutinized from all sides in a way he's never had to experience before because he's always kind of operated in the shadows in a way. And how overwhelming that feels. And I think that for viewers, you know, we are like, we're trying to keep our jobs in the year 2025, stay employed, trying to protect our health in the midst of an ongoing pandemic that is robbing so many people of their ability to do their job. And like, meanwhile, there's literally fascism happening everywhere. And, you know, you just want to like get through your day, but there's the sights and sounds, and we have the sights, and, you know, Matt doesn't, but like, of everything coming apart, coming around you, and how overwhelming that is for him.
Yeah. I mean, there's a couple of thoughts there. I mean, one is, at least in my personal experience, once you've worked in that arena, it is kind of hard. Everybody is, it's emotionally taxing, and everyone thinks at some point or another, it'd be nice to have a break. It'd be nice to work maybe for like a firm where I get paid more and don't have to have the emotional baggage with everything I do. But it's pretty, in my experience, people who come from this sort of social justice world don't normally enjoy that transition very much and usually find
Mhm.
themselves getting back into the grind one way or the other. Um, so that part resonates for sure. And then I guess like the larger cacophony, I think is something that, yeah, all of us are dealing with right now. I mean, the most common conversation I have with friends, colleagues, people who work in the advocacy space is like, "How are you doing?" It's like, "Well, I already had a hard job. It was usually to advance some kind of like noble cause with limited resources, and now I'm doing that. Plus, there's like a fascist president in the White House who's making everybody's life harder." Economically, socially, and politically. So just throw that into the pan. And so that's definitely I think, leading to a lot of people feeling quite burnt out and figuring out how we can get through this period.
Yeah. Yeah. And like just, Matt ultimately, he becomes Daredevil again because he doesn't have a choice in as he sees it. And in part he doesn't have a choice because he hasn't let himself consider other forms of alternatives that like, I don't know, running for mayor. They certainly can't say he's a carpetbagger. That not that he should run for mayor right away. He'd have to run for city council first, but you follow me here. But
He's
like
got the he's got the name rec. He could jump.
he does have a calling. He has a calling and he can't just pretend that people aren't suffering.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, oh, how wonderful was the Latvian Day episode?
I was thinking about as I was watching, I was like, didn't Eric Adams raise the Latvian flag at one point? I mean, I feel like that felt like another very realistic scene. New York is a million little tribes scattered across the five boroughs, and you definitely see it if you're ever working for a citywide candidate or you are a citywide
Mhm.
candidate. It's like, oh, there's all these little pockets of little this and little that, and this club and this civic association. The Nepalese Civic Association,
Yep.
the Polish, union workers, and it's you really get everything in this city, and it's that Latvian scene really captured that nicely.
Well, I just loved how it became a theme throughout the episode. It's like this holiday that is not on people's radar if they aren't working in this sort of space or Latvian themselves. And it just keeps popping up throughout the day. I mean, when I worked for the only citywide race that I was like an employee of a campaign on was Norman Siegel's second run for public advocate. And
Wait, which one?
uh,
2005?
yeah.
That's crazy. Mine. I worked for Norman's 2009 race.
Oh, okay. Yeah,
I
yeah.
don't think we even knew
Yeah,
that about
2000.
each other, but yeah,
Mhm.
that. I mean,
T
Norman's quite a guy to those campaigns were something.
Oh god, they were so when I worked on a citywide race for Norman, I similarly found myself not only are there like a million and one different community-driven ethnic holidays, every single borough has its own version of the big parades and big ones. So, like, every borough has a Puerto Rican parade and a Dominican parade. So there's like 10 different Puerto Rican and 10 different Dominican Day parades.
Absolutely. I mean, Staten Island is known for the controversy around its St. Patrick's Day parade, which until
Mhm.
this year did not allow LGBT uh, organizations to march in it, and now finally has. And as all this drama was going down, I was like, wait a minute, this isn't even on St. Patrick's Day. This is like 2 weeks before.
Oh,
And that's just because, I suppose probably the real St. Patrick's Day is in Manhattan or something. But
yep.
it goes to your point, there's St. Patrick's Day marches all over the city at different times.
I think I have carried so many pounds of campaign lit up and down the Grand Concourse in the Bronx. I I don't how did I survive in the heat? I don't even know. But it was such a great New York touch for them to understand how that operates for us. What did you think of the recycling contractor scandal side plot? Barely mentioned, but was excited that it existed.
It's interesting that at a time when organized labor is so weak in the United States generally, it is still a pretty important political factor in New York. I just found it interesting how pissed Kingpin and the staff were. That I mean, the real issue was that they were being labeled as anti-union for not, for doing this contract that would undermine sanitation workers. And it's like you could imagine a show writing a character like Kingpin to not actually even care about that, right? But it's like
Mhm.
even though he's a supervillain, and can kill people with his bare hands, he's connected to the mob. It's like, damn it, I need those union votes.
Mhm.
And I thought that was a nice touch because, like, it's like, yeah, I mean, you. It also, in going back to sort of like, what is his ideology, like political framing, right? And for a person like him to win an election in New York City, I mean, he's not a MAGA Republican, right? I mean, he's because MAGA Republican might be like, who cares about the sanitation workers union,
Yeah.
But in the world of Kingpin's politics, it's like, no, this is a terrible political blow. Stop everything. We have to hold an emergency meeting about this. So I thought that was kind of interesting from a political standpoint. It's like, okay, he's like a moderate Democrat who really can't upset uh, these unions that are probably filled with outer borough workers.
Because the thing is, that's how Republicans in New York are. I mean, like, there
Hmm.
just is enough power that you cannot run as an anti-union candidate in New York. So, like, in any other city, Eric Adams would be a Republican. And I certainly think, given the fact that Andrew Cuomo spent his career keeping Republicans in power in the Senate, um, that it's like, well, yeah, it just speaks to the union power rather than an ideological framework, I think.
And both Adams and Cuomo have, been very strategic in their relationship with certain unions throughout their careers. I mean, Adams gave very generous contracts to certain unions early in his mayoralty. Didn't help him, make it to the finish line to run for re-election, really. But I mean, it did give him
Mhm.
a veneer of strength early on, and that's why it actually took a while to figure out who was going to run against him because it was just sort of considered that all the unions were going to stand by Adams. I mean, that was really the consistent reasoning everybody had until the scandals just got too much for him to bear. And I think
Yeah.
in Cuomo's case too, he's gotten what, 3 out of the 5 big ones to support him, and that's just because New York, it's a two-way street. New York unions, people think, well, aren't they like they're New York City unions? Maybe they're kind of like progressive or excited. It's like actually, they are pretty good. At judging who they think is going to win and
Yeah.
getting behind them unless like there's a reason not to. And so I do think like even for people like Cuomo and Adams, it's a very important part of their political strategy.
Which is why it's so amazing to me and promising that we have a number of unions who did not endorse Cuomo or Adams. I
Hmm.
was shocked. I did not suspect that there'd be any large
Hmm.
labor unions because all of them are significant. I did not expect there would be any large labor unions that would not endorse Cuomo and Adams. And that speaks to, I think, the fact that, yeah, like Zoran Lander, like they're serious candidates. Adrian Adams, no relation to Eric, like these are like they're like real candidates who are running, and that people have seen that these other guys have gone beyond the pale of what could possibly be considered acceptable for someone in office to do. So there's one moment that happened in an episode that you haven't seen yet, but I don't consider it but like just roll with me. I have to share this quote. Um, Kingpin, who I now keep almost calling Cuomo, Kingpin attempts to characterize he's like pulling together this like super goon squad of the most violent cops to be his personal cop army. And he says that like Daredevil single-handedly destroyed 10 years of infrastructure, a network of blue-collar millionaires and port workers, which is how he's characterizing his
I
criminal
saw him say
network.
that. I must have seen that episode because I remember
Oh,
that quote.
good. Okay, I
Yes.
guess my notes
Hmm.
are wrong about. Okay, can we reflect on that reframe of who you are and what you stand for that we got from Kingpin slash Cuomo there?
But isn't this another example of how maybe Kingpin is better than Cuomo? Because has Cuomo built such a network? It's interesting. I mean, it's interesting. I mean, I work with a lot of formerly incarcerated people, right? And like, there are a lot of great formerly incarcerated entrepreneurs who, one, aren't given a chance to really succeed in the conventional labor market
Yeah.
because of their record, and so entrepreneurialism is actually better for them. But then also, like, as young people, like that was the opportunities given to them. Before I was ever a criminal justice advocate, even just way back in law school, I was doing programming with young people at Rikers Island, and I always thought, working with 16-year-olds there, that like to wind up at Rikers at 16, you either have to be pretty dumb or really smart, because you either has to
Mm.
do something that gets you in a lot of trouble, or you're like running a street organization at age 16 that carries enough criminal consequence that you're being sent to Rikers Island. And some of these young people are just brilliant entrepreneurs. And so that's that when he said that line came up in the show, I was like, yeah, no, I can picture that. It's like sometimes these are the opportunities that people have access to. But it's just,
Mm.
not to over give Kingpin credit for it, but I mean, at least he has created a network. I mean, I think this goes back to what you said at the beginning, very beginning of the show, and bring it back to Andrew Cuomo. I think it's really important for people to know that far from being this sort of like master creator, master builder, I mean, he's always had a very self-interested uh, goal in everything that he's done. He's done good things at times. He's been pushed into doing good things by advocates, by a Democratic legislature when we finally got one. Um, but the major endeavors he's taken on have usually been in pursuit of, what positions him for the presidency, which was his goal for many years. I would like to think he's disabused himself of that notion, but
No, it's why
he
he's
probably
running for
hasn't.
mayor.
He,
Yeah, he's
yeah,
running for mayor to be president because he wants to run for president. He doesn't give a he doesn't even live in New York. Like, we factually know he does not live in New York City.
yeah.
So,
So,
yeah.
yeah, I mean, his whole career has really been driven by self-advancement, self-interest. He has not built a network of blue collar millionaires behind him. If he had, I mean, I'd tip my hat to him.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like, it really was true. I was like, the framing of putting himself as a hero in those terms, I thought was just so brilliant on the show. Of course, the infrastructure was infrastructure, like literally around like drugs and distribution. But he's like, but we were supporting port workers. Oh my God. So ultimately, I think, one of the main points of Kingpin's appeal to the voter is something that I think we also will hear from voters who might be under the impression that they want to vote for Cuomo, which is um, somebody, we have a scene where there's like a giant pothole the size of a SUV in the middle of the
Yes.
road,
Hmm.
and Kingpin gets out of his car and he's like, "I want to make things happen despite red." Kingpin's all about making things happen despite the red tape, and that is like what people echo about him. So what do we say about those claims about Cuomo?
Well, it's interesting, right? Because it kind of jumps into the abundance bro conversation also. There is a perception that Cuomo is this guy who gets big things done. And I think when you follow the three plus terms he was, it was no, the 3 terms that he was governor, that's a lot of time. It's a lot of resources. There were some things that happened under him. Um, LaGuardia Airport was improved, things of that
Mhm.
nature. Um, Second Avenue subway line, which, still only, I mean, still over budget, way behind schedule, but compared to his predecessors, it was a getting things done moment. But it was at the expense of really improving the day-to-day lives for people around New York State and especially in New York City. I mean, the MTA may have opened 3 new stations, but it qualitatively got worse under Governor Cuomo. Housing costs went up for people. Mental health care went down. And that when you know who Andrew Cuomo is and how he runs his administration, that's not surprising because it is complicated to run a city or run a state. But when you have an inner circle that's really small and you don't trust people that are outside of it, you're going to run into challenges where, yeah, it's hard to hold a complicated state mental health system together if you're not giving it attention, you're not giving it resources, and you're not delegating that work to people who are empowered to do it well. And so when you look back on Cuomo's tenure, there are some shiny objects, but he did not materially improve the lives of a lot of people in New York State. And I think it'll be that challenge magnified as mayor, because when you're mayor, you have to handle way more day to day urgent matters that affect the lives of regular people than a governor does. I mean, just
Mm.
the way that sort of fire, sanitation, teachers, uh, you know, uh, operate here in the city. It's just like there's always it's a very challenging job for anybody, and it's the idea that you can just sort of like, yes, you can go if and fill that one pothole, but like that's not a strategy. Like that, you need an actual strategy to fill all the potholes. And that's not something that Cuomo's demonstrated that he has, and neither is Kingpin, right? I do think
Yeah.
the perceptive point for this moment in politics is like there has been a broader criticism of Democrats and Democratic run cities being unable to seemingly get big things done. And I think that'll certainly be uh, the challenge and goal of the Mamdani administration, right? Is like there are going to be big hopes and big dreams that come with that, and we're going to need to deliver, and that's going to mean. And Zora and I have spoken about this, and I know that he believes that it's way more than what one man can do or one woman can do, right? It's about putting together. You need to have an incredible team. You need to empower them. You need to hire really good people to work at City Hall and all the agencies. And that's how you fill all the potholes. That's how you build
Mm-hmm.
a stronger transportation network and a real mental health care network and a public safety network that doesn't rely on policing, right? It's really the opposite of the Kingpin, like stand here and fill this pothole approach.
That's so real. And when I look at the organizations and people who've endorsed Zoran, who've endorsed Brad Lander, their comptroller, um, like these are the people who I would want to have working in these policy positions in the city to actually make things happen. That relationship is there. And I think the thing with, the thing with like Trump or with like Kingpin is like, we'll make what happen? Like Trump sure is making something happen. Is it something that you want to have happen? And with Cuomo, everything is a dick measuring contest. He
Hmm.
literally delayed the distribution of COVID vaccines in the city because he did not want de Blasio to get credit for the distribution site. So
Hmm.
there are people who literally got COVID and died. Like, on top of the nursing home scandal you've all heard of, and if you haven't, go back and look up the nursing home scandal. People died because they couldn't get the vaccine fast enough because of Cuomo being in a dick measuring contest against de Blasio over who was going to be the bigger man. Like, you can't successfully, if the number one concern a person has is their ego, that will not lead to good results. You'll never be their number one concern because it'll always be
Hmm.
about how big their dick is. Like, that's it, you know?
Yeah, I agree. Cosign.
So thank you so much for coming on the show. Where can our listeners keep up with you and your work?
Sure. Well, my day job is working with dream.org, which is a national advocacy organization working on criminal justice and climate. So if you're interested in that, wherever you live in the United States for a national organization, you can follow dream.org. Our name is our website, so that's easy. As far as me, I'm on Twitter and Blue Sky and LinkedIn, all of them just under my name. And I also have a Substack called The Game Plan, where I write about how people can become more effective advocates. Because I think, what I've come to learn in my 25 years of doing this is we need way more people who care about this stuff, who are skilled in how we win the campaigns that we need to. So feel free to follow that. And I will be writing soon about why I'm supporting Zoran Mamdani. So that's probably going to be the next thing that I get out there
Mm.
doing my part to make sure that we have a real progressive champion win and not have a Kingpin situation for the next 4 years.
And you just ran a piece that helped people questions to ask yourself before deciding to run for office, which
Yes, that felt good to write. I mean, it's been
mhm.
in my brain for ever since I ran. And these are questions. I was somebody who had been in organizing politics a long time before my first run, but there is really something different about running for office than all the other types of advocacy. And I think the article asks 5 important questions that people should ask themselves before putting themselves, their network through what is a really difficult process.
So with that, I want to get folks a little information about voting. For the record, this episode does not have a sponsor. This is just me speaking as an individual. The voter registration deadline is June 14th. And if you are not a registered Democrat, you can't vote in the election. It's too late to change parties to vote this election. But if you are just not registered or you have just, moved to New York or changing your voter registration from someplace else to New York, you can still register as a Democrat and register to vote by June 14th. And that is the first day of early voting. Starts at June 14th. And the final day of in-person voting is June 24. But look, you can find your polling places. You can get all your questions answered when you go to nycvotes.org. That's nycvotes.org. You can see the Working Families Party slate, which is a local grassroots progressive organization that does really amazing work bridging community groups, labor unions, and has an endorsement process that I've participated in. You can see our whole slate over at ranktheslate.nyc. It has information about the race for comptroller, for public advocate, city council. We also have lots of really good information about city council races and all that. For the other organization I'm involved with, which is Jews for Racial and Economic Justice, and our website there is jfrej.org/ballot. So you can come and get all the information you need to come and vote. It really is going to be tight with this election, and we need everyone to make sure that they're ranking Zoran somewhere on your card. I'm certainly voting for Brad Lander as well. But the number one thing, of course, is do not rank Cuomo anywhere on your ballot. As I tried to explain with how ranked choice voting works earlier, if you have more questions on that, happy to answer them. But it's all really clear up on those websites that I listed how it works. And again, if you're not from New York, I know you know folks who are. Please help us spread the word to your friends, because this election is going to be really tight. And it has so much to say about the future security for our country and our city. And we cannot afford to have a Trump-enabling, corrupt kingpin like Cuomo at the helm of our city, especially not during a Trump administration. And keep it geeky, as we like to say.